Hi, I'm Hyowon, and I'm very excited to be a part of this workshop today. So first of all, thanks to the organizers for drawing attention to this topic of social intelligence from the machine learning, AI, and robotics community, and for inviting researchers from multiple disciplines to share their perspectives. So as for me, I study how humans learn, especially infants and young children. And as many of you at this workshop are looking towards cognitive science and developmental psychology for inspirations for designing better, more powerful I hope that some of the work that we're doing and the way we think about social learning can lead to new ideas and directions for research and even collaborations. So first, let's take a look at what learning looks like in young children. So many of you may have seen this video. It's adorable and funny, and it's a great example of a curious human learner who is intrinsically motivated to explore the world actively and generate new data and learn how the world works. However, what is not captured in this field of view are his caregivers and family members who are likely right nearby, who created this safe environment with lots of things to explore. And if the baby were to ever put himself in danger, they would come right over and pick him up and tell him not to do it again. So, as humans, we're surrounded by others from the moment we're born. We track their behaviors, we're curious about what they do, and we're taught by people who want to help us learn. And as a society, we've even developed and designed environments that promote learning from others, from daycares to schools and to even conferences and workshops like the one we're having today. So, I actually think learning looks much more like this. Let's take a look.
See this?
Stop. What is it?
This is a blicket.
Stop. What's a blanket?
See that? Alright, I'm going to give you a bunch of blickets to play with while I write something down, okay?
So she saw something called blickets that stick to the board, and then she was given a bunch of other things that are also called
They're
blickets.
still not sticking. How do these stick?
Just let me know when you're done playing.
See. Oh, they're not sticking.
That's weird.
I think there's no stickiness anymore. Come on. These are not working. Maybe I can build something.
Just let me know when you're done playing, okay?
Well, you can. Ethan wants to help me build a tower.
So what did you see from this less than a minute of a child's play? You probably found a range of behaviors that are critical for learning. So she observed what the adult does and she imitated that action. She tried to stick this blicket to the board and she generalized what she's observed to the rest of the blickets. So she expected them to stick too. And when things didn't go as expected, she started to explore all these other blickets to see if they stick as well. And the whole time she was trying to explain what she thinks is going on and why they're not working in a way that communicates a lot of these thoughts to the adults sitting in front of her. And in the end, what she does is to even generate a new goal of building a tower with these blickets with the help of her brother. So all of this is happening in parallel in less than a minute. So imagine what it means for a child to be doing this for a lifetime. So the question that guides our research is what makes human social learning so powerful, distinctive, and smart? What are the cognitive mechanisms? What are the representations and inferential processes that make this possible? And especially in the context of this workshop today, I also want to ask how we can use these insights to build better AI agents. Well, let's first think about what it means to learn from others. What's our intuitive belief about social learning? So, we tend to think of social learning as something that's totally separate from individual learning, and it's a cheaper shortcut. So, instead of you having to explore the world and discover all of the things by yourself, you can copy what others do, imitate others' actions, and follow expert demonstration and advice. And learning from teachers means one-way transmission of information. So you can just wait for teachers to feed you information. You can absorb what you're taught. So our idea of social learning is almost like the antithesis of what it means to be an active, curious learner. So compared to the exciting picture of children as scientists who are intrinsically motivated to learn, children as social learners look somewhat passive or even deferential. So I want to argue that this is a misconception, and my goal today is to present a different picture of social learning and provide examples of studies that support and extend this picture, and present some thoughts for building intelligent machines that learn from and interact with and help humans. So to do this, let's start from our broad idea of how humans learn more generally. So consider this learner with a toy that looks like this, and maybe the learner explores this toy and eventually discovers that if you pull out this tube, the toy makes a sound. So Bayesian models of human cognition have formalized learning as probabilistic inferences over abstract structured representations. So the idea is that humans have rich priors that they bring in to interpret the observed evidence, and they draw powerful inferences from observed data, which often comes from the learner's own exploration of the world. And consistent with this idea, developmental research also shows that infants can engage in exploratory play, they test competing hypotheses, and learn from self-generated evidence. But what's been missing from this picture is the fact that humans are also surrounded by other people who interact with these objects, and learners often may see other people activating this toy and learn from that kind of evidence. So the idea behind inferential social learning is that learners not only learn from self-generated evidence from their own exploratory play or exploration, but also from evidence generated by other agents. However, learning from data generated by others involves some interesting understanding about what other people do and why, because agents can generate evidence in many different ways. So, for instance, people might perform incidental actions without a clear goal. They might provide or perform instrumental actions with a self-serving goal without any regard to the learner. However, they also might provide instructional actions, pedagogical actions, with a clear communicative goal of teaching the learner something useful about the world. So, to the extent that the learner can distinguish different kinds of actions, they can consider how information was generated by who and why and how, and they can draw different inferences even from seemingly the same set of data. And these inferences can be especially powerful when the evidence is generated by teachers who want to help the learner learn. So, learning from evidence generated to help others learn is an interesting case of inferential social learning. So, the teacher is selecting the data deliberately in order to convey what is maximally helpful for the learner to know. And to the extent that the learner recognizes this, the learner can interpret the data to figure out what the teacher is trying to convey and update their beliefs accordingly. So, in this kind of context, the teacher is expected to and will often generate evidence that is accurate, sufficient, and not superfluous. So, the key hypothesis that this picture generates are the following. First, learners ought to be able to distinguish different ways in which other people, other agents can generate evidence, that is, the sampling process of the data, and draw inferences accordingly. And second, learners ought to be able to evaluate teachers based on the quality of the evidence. Are they accurate? Are they sufficient? Are they not superfluous? And third, even though we tend to think learners are kids and teachers are adults, learners can eventually become teachers who can generate helpful evidence for others. So the first hypothesis, let's take a look at some of the studies we've done to test this idea. Take a look at this box. There's a box that has many blue toys and just a few yellow toys. And imagine I casually reach inside the box and draw this particular blue toy. I try to squeeze this toy and the toy makes a squeak sound. I do it again. I do it again. So based on these three blue toys from this kind of box, what would you learn? Especially when you're given the yellow toy now, would you think that the yellow toy also squeaked too? So in this case, you might be not so sure, but because the sample is pretty probable given the composition of the population, it could have been sampled randomly. And the idea is that if they came from the same box, they kind of look the same, you might expect that the yellow toy might also squeak as well. At least you might want to give it a try and see if it squeaks. And if it doesn't, you might try to squeeze a few times just to make sure it doesn't. However, the picture is a little different if the sample comes from a box that looks like this. So if the 3 blue toys are drawn from a box that has many more yellow toys compared to blue, the sample is much more improbable, suggesting a strong biased sampling process. The idea is that if I were to draw these toys from this kind of box, presumably I wanted to select the blue toys because only the blue ones squeak and the yellow ones do not. So in this case, if the learner understands this, the learner might expect the yellow toy to not squeak and think that only the blue ones are the squeaky ones. So what we have done across a number of conditions where we manipulated the relationship between the sample and the population is that even infants, pre-verbal infants, are drawing graded probabilistic inferences about the property of the yellow toy, even though they never observed any demonstration of the yellow toys themselves. So depending on the probability of the sample, given the population and the sampling process, they draw different inductive generalization about the property of the yellow toy. Now, learning from teachers is a case of strong sampling where the teacher deliberately selects the best set of evidence for the learner, given what the learner knows and wants to learn. So what this means is that if the learner understands the difference between learning from a teacher who knows something about the world and somebody who doesn't know anything, they ought to be able to draw different inferences depending on the context and depending on who they're learning from. So consider this toy again. If you pull out this toy part of the tube, the toy makes a squeak sound. And children saw this evidence in 2 different contexts. One is where there was an adult who claims to be a teacher. This is her toy, and she knows all about this toy. And she says, let me show you how this toy works. And then she demonstrates the squeaker part of the toy to show that it squeaks. In the other condition, what children saw is that this person never saw this toy before, and she was trying to show this toy to the child, and she accidentally stumbles upon this particular function of the toy and accidentally discovers it. And now the question is what children think about what the toy does. So what we found is that in this condition on the left side, children actually infer that there's no other functions of the toy. This is the only thing that the toy does, because if the teacher knew everything about the toy, and if there were other functions, she would have shown those as well, and she didn't. So what children do when they're given a chance to play with the toy is to mostly focus on playing with this particular squeaker part of the toy. And what they do is end up missing out on the opportunities to actually discover these additional hidden functions. However, this isn't the case when children see the same set of evidence from an accidental discoverer. And what children do is to explore the toy more broadly because there's no reason to think that the toy doesn't do other things. And what they do is to explore the toy more broadly and ends up discovering more of these hidden functions. So what's impressive is that even though children in this pedagogical condition on the left side ended up missing out opportunities for discovery, what they did is quite rational because they believed the teacher to be showing them everything that they ought to learn. So if you think about the teacher who claimed to know all about the toy, in principle, she didn't do anything wrong. She showed something true about the toy after all. But did she provide the best evidence that she could? No. Well, she omitted a bunch of other interesting things. So she was under-informative teacher. In other words, she committed a sin of omission. So when learners learn from teachers, they expect information from teachers to be not just true, but also sufficient for accurate learning and not superfluous as well. And another set of experiments we've done is to try to show that even young children can evaluate teachers based on the quality of the evidence they generate. So for instance, when children see a teacher who provides a demonstration of one function of a toy that actually has 4 different functions, just like the other teacher you saw, children rate this teacher as less helpful compared to a person who showed basically the same function, but on a toy that doesn't have additional functions. And children also resist learning from this kind of person, adjust their inferences based on what they have observed from the teacher in order to resist learning from the teacher and draw strong inferences. So an additional set of studies have shown that children not only penalize these teachers, but also exonerate such underinformative teachers if they wanted to show but couldn't have shown because they didn't know about those hidden functions. And in addition to evaluating underinformative pedagogy, they also evaluate overinformative pedagogy, people who provide too much information or superfluous information. Now, what is important about this fact is that to the extent that learners can evaluate teachers who violate their expectations about what it means to be a helpful teacher, then when they're given a chance to teach another person, they ought to be able to provide and generate helpful evidence as well. So consider this toy with 20 identical buttons, only 3 of which play music. And the rest of the 17 buttons don't do anything. So if you are this child who has to show another person how this toy works, would you press just the 3 buttons or would you press all 20 buttons? Well, the answer is that it depends on what the learner knows and expects. If the learner has some prior knowledge or experience, such that the learner expects only a few buttons to be working on this toy, then it may be sufficient to only provide just the 3 working buttons, and that would be efficient and easy. However, if the learner has never seen a toy like this before, then only providing 3 working buttons or demonstrations of 3 buttons would mislead the learner to think that maybe all buttons work in the same way. So in this case, it's really important to provide demonstrations of all 20 buttons to make sure that the learner knows everything about the toy, even though it may take a long time and really boring to press all 20 buttons, including the 17 buttons that don't do anything. So what we have shown is that children do press different numbers of buttons to demonstrate this toy to a learner, depending on what the learner knows and expects about this toy. What we have shown is that children consider common ground or others' knowledge to generate the right amount of information, and they generate causally informative evidence only when the learner is needed and wanted. Now, the important question here is that children not only provide informative evidence in terms of deciding how much to show, but they also decide what is important to teach in the first place. So this is important because learners can discover things on their own, and teachers can teach, but they can't teach everything. So as a helpful teacher, it is important to be able to prioritize teaching the most important things. So imagine you are stranded on an island like this Tom Hanks here, and after days and weeks of trying really hard to make fire, you finally learned how to do so. Now, if you encounter another person also stranded on the island who doesn't know how to make fire, you absolutely want to share this knowledge more than anything else because you expect this person to struggle so much for having to discover this all on his own. So the question is, given that we can't teach everything, how do we decide what to teach and what to let learners learn on their own? And the idea is that this decision can be formalized as choosing a plan that maximizes others' utilities for learning. So here in this study, what we're trying to test is whether children prioritize teaching that maximizes the learner's utility. Do they provide information that saves others trouble by decreasing the cost, and information that benefits others, that is, increase others' rewards? So let's take a look at what we have done here. Consider this toy that has a single button. If you press this button, the toy makes music. And compared to this toy that has multiple buttons, and the way that it works is that you have to press exactly these 2 buttons at the same time, and the toy will spin around and light up. So the top toy is what we call the low reward, low cost toy because it's really easy to discover how it works and it generates music that is kind of interesting, but not as exciting as this light up toy. So the bottom toy is what we call the high reward, high cost toy. So children had a chance to play with the toys and they learned how the toy works. So they took a short time to discover how the top toy works and took a long time to learn how this toy works. And then the question is, the experimenter has a friend who will play with these toys all by herself. Which toy should the experimenter teach her friend? So this is a decision to teach one and let the learner explore the other toy. So so this is only one of the many conditions we had. We systematically varied the relative cost and rewards of the two toys. So so in addition to this, we had a condition where we varied the cost and kept the reward constant. And in the rest of the conditions, we compared this high reward, low cost toy against low reward toys that varied in terms of their costs. So from low to medium to high to very high. And we built a simple model that considers the cost of learning from instruction and the cost of learning from exploration and computes the relative utility of two different choices. So you could teach the top toy in the first in the first set of examples here, right here. You could teach the top toy, but that would be not as good because then the learner will have to explore the other one and may struggle. But if you teach the bottom toy, you ensure that the learner learns this high reward toy without having to incur a huge cost. And if the learner explores this other toy, then the learner will surely be able to learn how this works too because it's easy to discover. So you can think of this as a comparison between two different teaching plans. And here's our model predictions here that shows varying proportions of choosing one toy over the other, depending on the condition. So what did children do? Here, I'm showing you children's responses, their choices between these two toys across 6 conditions. And as you can see, the results were remarkably consistent with our model predictions, suggesting that children are readily thinking about the expected utilities of the learner and choose what is best for them to learn from a teacher and let the learners explore and discover what they can do easily on their own. And this is incredibly important for thinking about how these teaching decisions that prioritize what is useful for others can cultivate a body of cultural knowledge that gets transmitted over generations. So far, what I have done is to show you a picture of social learning that is far more than simply copying or imitating others' actions. The idea is that we learn from evidence generated by others by drawing powerful inferences based on a model of how other people think, plan, and act. And even as young children, what they do is to go far beyond copying and imitation. They have an intuitive understanding of how others generate data, and they interpret the meaning of the evidence based on who did what and why. And even though we tend to think of learners as separate from how teachers teach, as soon as they learn something, young children can also generate helpful evidence for others to learn about the world. So what they do as teachers is much more than just teaching whatever is new or interesting for them, but they have a model of how the learner learns from evidence, and they consider what learners know and want and make decisions that maximize their utilities by trying to select the best set of evidence that is helpful for the learner to know. Now, this picture of social learning is just a small part of the larger picture, and there's many ways in which this interaction between two people, a teacher and a learner, a child and a parent, a student and a teacher, can be extended to understand many other aspects of early learning. So first of all, let's think about what counts as information in learning. So we're familiar with the role of surprise or prediction error in learning. This is a big idea that has inspired so many different research directions in reinforcement learning, in neuroscience, as well as AI. And consistent with this, developmental research has shown that when learners, even infants, observe surprising evidence, this can lead to exploration, and they use prediction error as a signal for learning. However, in order to learn from one's own surprise, the learners have to know something to even make a prediction in the first place. But if you don't know anything, then you wouldn't be able to learn from your surprise because you wouldn't be surprised in the first place. But consider this case where the learner doesn't have access to some parts of the world and observe another person express surprise. If the learner understands something about what makes people surprised, then the learner can immediately start wondering, well, what's over there? What did that person see? And infer that there's probably something unexpected behind where they cannot see anything, even though they can't see exactly what's there. So the question is, how do children learn from emotional expressions of other people? And in particular, how do they use surprise expressions to use it as information that provides some evidence about hidden states of the world? And can they use other surprise as vicarious prediction error? So just to show you one example of many, this is work led by Yang Wu, who is starting out as a faculty member soon at University of Toronto Scarborough. And what we have done here is to show babies something like this. So take a look at this person who has a box full of mostly red toys and just a few white, and she randomly draws one ball and puts the ball inside a small black box. What do you think is inside the box? You probably know or can predict that there's probably the red one instead of the white one. And we know from prior work that even infants expect to see a red ball and are surprised to find a white ball inside. And they look longer at this unexpected outcome. So we first replicated this finding and showed and then ran another set of experiments like this. Now, after she's taken a ball and put something inside the box,
I got one and I put it in here. Okay, I'm going to take a look first. Look what I got.
So now, what do you think is inside the box? Now, so what the surprise expression does is to turn the unexpected outcome to expected and expected outcome to an unexpected outcome. So watching another person's surprise expression allows you to revise your prediction about what is inside the box. So what we have shown is that infants look we are flipping the looking time in the reverse direction. So children are now looking longer at the red ball compared to the white ball. However, when the person doesn't show surprise and is just smiling at the outcome, then we show the usual predicted response, looking longer at the white ball, which is unexpected without the surprise. Now we can also ask what counts as teaching. So in prior work, what I have shown is that even 16-month-old infants, when they run into trouble, they don't keep imitating or give up. What they do is to reason about why they failed and try to choose the best course of action. So when they have a reason to think that it's the world, the toy is broken, then they try to explore a different toy. However, if they have a reason to think that it's not the toy, but they themselves did something wrong, then they would try to seek help from another person. But what do we do when we see somebody else fail? So we know from prior literature that even infants are motivated to help other people, but wanting to help is often not enough because in order to help, you have to know how to help them. And that requires knowledge and problem-solving skills. And by reasoning about why others failed, we can provide more effective help. So in this study with Sophie Bridgers and Sarah Altman, what we have tested is the idea that if a person fails to activate a toy, if children understand that it's because the toy is faulty, they should offer a different toy that actually works. But if it's something about her action and she's working on the toy in the wrong way, then they should be showing her the correct way to activate the toy. So what we have done is to try to show children two identical looking toys, and we did so in two different conditions. They were mostly similar, but different only in the causal structure of the toys. So in both conditions, children saw a person who enters the room and says she wants to activate she wants to make the music, and she presses one of the buttons on the toy, and the toy doesn't do anything. And she says, "Can you help me play music?" And just prior to this, children had explored the toy for the first time. They just learned how the toys work. And in the broken toy condition, the toys have two buttons on two of the sides each. And one toy doesn't work at all, and the other toy has two buttons that work. So in this case, what children should do is to immediately infer based on her failure that, oh, she's working on the broken toy, so I should be giving her the toy that works actually, and try to offer her the other toy. In the wrong button condition, however, each toy has one button that works and another button that does not work. So immediately as they see the person's failure, they should understand that she's working on the wrong side of the toy. So they should be flipping over the toy to show her the actual side that has a working button. So what we have shown is that even 2-year-olds and 1-year-olds are able to do what is required for effective help. They give the experimenter the working toy in the broken toy condition, but they flip the toy over to the other side in the wrong button condition to show her how it works. So let me show you a 1-year-old who's showing this behavior in the broken toy condition. So the toys look identical and there's no way to tell, and the father actually also doesn't know which buttons work on these toys.
Can you help me play music?
Go ahead, Leo. Could you help your dad play music? Nice job, Leo.
So what we have shown, what is so remarkable about this behavior is that this little kid wasn't simply trying to make the toy go. He understands what his dad wants to do. And as soon as the dad fails, he realizes he's working on the wrong toy, goes over to the other one and looks towards his dad to make sure he saw it. So some of you may have seen this video of a young toddler who's opening up the cabinet to help this person. And just around the same age, they opened this cabinet door for this person whose hands are full of books. And in this case, it's pretty simple to figure out how to help. When there is something that's blocking other people's goals, then remove that obstacle. And even that is already pretty impressive that 1-year-olds are showing this behavior. But in cases where somebody's ignorance is leading them awry, it becomes a little trickier to understand how best to help. You have to use your knowledge to let them know and inform them in some way. And what these children are doing already at this age are able to use their prior knowledge to help others learn and inform others in a way that almost looks like proto-teaching type of behavior. So I think one of the most remarkable aspects of human intelligence is that we not only use it for our own learning, but we also use it to help others solve their problems. So just to zoom out a little bit, what I've shown you again is inferential social learning as learning from evidence generated by others. This requires a generative model of how and why others think, plan, and act. And it suggests the role of theory of mind in a broad sense. So not just thinking about others' beliefs and desires, but also their utilities. And I've shown you evidence for the key hypotheses in terms of learning and evaluation, as well as teaching and communication, and shown you some of the ways that we've been extending this picture beyond the usual teacher-learner relationships. So what does this all mean? In computer vision, there's been so much progress in recognizing and labeling objects and people and even their emotional expressions. And I think the most important next question is, how do we make our machines smarter so that they would know what to do with these representations? And in machine learning and AI, there's been so much progress on how to make algorithms that perform tasks or games with clear end states and end goals. And they're remarkably good at predicting future states and learning from error signals. And again, I think the next question is, how can we create agents that can observe and generalize and explain and communicate and truly interact with others? So one thing, in order to get there, one thing we need to really better understand is what drives the human motivation to learn, help, and communicate. And some of the new work coming out of our lab is suggesting that we're not only motivated to learn about the external world, we're also driven to learn about ourselves and about others by engaging with social interactions with others. And we're not only driven to improve our predictions about how the world works, we're also driven to improve who we are in terms of competence as well as generosity. And we want to be accepted by, approved by, and liked by other people. And while reinforcement learning is a powerful framework for designing agents that are motivated to do things, the tricky part is figuring out what the reward function is. And also the concept of social learning through the lens of reinforcement learning has been rather limited. And this is a perspective we've been able to express in a more formal way in this recent article with Natalia Velez, who is also actually starting out as an assistant professor at Princeton in 2023. So the take-home message is that, well, this is not how humans learn. And this is not how humans learn either, although this does happen. But maybe human learning often looks more like this. And rather than just learning from one's own actions and learning from copying others, human learners are trying to infer the contents of others' minds, and they generate evidence that helps others learn. And by incorporating these abilities, artificial agents can be far more powerful and flexible learners. And perhaps we can get closer to having machines that can understand and learn from, communicate with, and even help humans in our daily lives. So thanks for listening, and I'll be excited to hear your questions.